It was the summer of 1984, in Maple Hollow, Kentucky, the kind of place where everyone knew your name before you learned to spell it, where tobacco fields stretched to the horizon like green ocean, and the only sounds after dark were cicadas singing against the static of AM radio drifting from pickup truck windows. The town had one high school, 2 churches, a general store that closed at 6, and a population that hadn't changed much since the 1950s. June 2nd fell on a Saturday that year. The last day of school had ended hours earlier, and by nightfall, nearly every teenager in Maple Hollow had gathered at the bonfire behind the high school. It was tradition, the end-of-year celebration, where seniors burned their notebooks, underclassmen dared each other to jump the creek, and someone always brought a guitar that nobody really knew how to play. Laura Mae Hensley was 16 that year. She wore her favorite denim jacket over a white cotton blouse, jeans rolled at the ankles, and a pair of worn Keds that had seen too many miles of dirt roads. Her hair was long and brown, pulled back in a ponytail that swayed when she laughed. She had her mother's eyes, soft, hazel, the kind that made you feel like she was really listening when you spoke. Laura wasn't the loudest girl at the bonfire. She wasn't the quietest either. She sat near the edge of the circle, close enough to feel the warmth of the flames, far enough to watch the stars blink through the smoke. Her best friend, Samantha Pike, sat beside her, talking about summer plans, working at her dad's diner, saving up for a car, maybe driving out to Lexington for a concert if they could get tickets. Laura nodded along, but her mind seemed somewhere else. Samantha would remember that later. The way Laura kept glancing toward the school gates, the way she checked her watch twice in 10 minutes, the way she smiled, but didn't quite meet anyone's eyes. At 9:43 p.m., Laura stood up. "I should head home," she said, brushing grass off her jeans. Samantha looked up. "You want a ride? My brother's picking me up in 20. Laura shook her head. "It's only 2 miles. I'll walk." "You're sure?" "Yeah. I'll be fine." She waved goodbye to a few classmates, pulled her jacket tighter against the cool night air, and started down the gravel path that led away from the school. The bonfire crackled behind her. Someone turned up the radio. Bruce Springsteen's voice drifted across the field, singing about streets on fire and dreams in the night. Laura walked alone. The road from Maple Hollow High to the Hensley farmhouse was a simple route. 2 miles of dirt and gravel, cutting through fields of tobacco and corn, past the old water tower that hadn't worked since the 60s, past the fence line where Mr. Calloway's horses sometimes grazed in the moonlight. No streetlights, no sidewalks. Just the kind of road you walked 100 times before you thought twice about it. Laura had walked it her whole life. Her house sat at the end of County Road 61, a white 2-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch and a barn out back where her father, Thomas Hensley, kept his tools and tractors. Her mother, Catherine, usually left the porch light on when Laura stayed out late, a small beacon in the dark, guiding her daughter home. But that night, Laura never made it to the porch light. By 10:30 p.m, Catherine began to worry. She stood at the kitchen window, arms crossed, watching the driveway. Thomas sat at the table behind her, reading the Courier-Journal by lamplight. She said she'd be home by 10. Catherine said quietly. Thomas glanced up, probably just talking with Samantha. "You know how they get." She didn't take the truck. She walked. "It's 2 miles, Kathy. She's done it 1,000 times. Catherine didn't answer. She just kept watching the window. By 11 o'clock p.m. Thomas was on the phone. He called the Pike house first. Samantha's mother answered, surprised. No, Samantha was still at the bonfire. Her brother hadn't picked her up yet. She'd seen Laura leave around 9:45, maybe earlier, alone heading toward the main road. Thomas called 3 more neighbors. Nobody had seen her. By 11:30, he was in his truck, headlights cutting through the darkness as he drove slowly down County Road 61. Windows rolled down, calling her name into the night. Laura, Laura Mae. Nothing, only the cicadas answered. He passed the water tower, the fence line, the turnoff toward the church. He drove all the way back to the school, where a few stragglers were still cleaning up after the bonfire. Nobody had seen her since she left. Thomas returned home just after midnight. Catherine was standing on the porch, her face pale in the yellow glow of the light. She didn't need to ask. She already knew. At 12:47 a.m., Thomas called the sheriff's office. Sheriff Emmett Crowder arrived at the Hensley farm 20 minutes later, his patrol car kicking up dust as it rolled to a stop in the driveway. He was a tall man, thick around the middle, with a weathered face and a slow, deliberate way of speaking that came from 30 years of handling small-town problems, lost dogs, bar fights, the occasional stolen tractor. But this was different. Catherine met him at the door, her voice breaking as she explained. Laura had left the bonfire. She was walking home. She should have been here an hour ago, maybe 2. Crowder asked the standard question. Was Laura upset? Had she been fighting with anyone? Did she have a boyfriend? Was there any reason she might run away? Catherine shook her head to all of it. She's a good girl, Sheriff. She doesn't get into trouble. She just wanted to come home. Thomas stood behind her, arms folded, jaw tight. We need to search now. Crowder nodded. I'll call in deputy. We'll start at first light. First light. Thomas's voice rose. She's been missing for 3 hours. Mr. Hensley, Crowder interrupted gently. We can't see anything out there right now. No moon tonight. We'd be walking blind. We'll organize a proper search at dawn. I'll have every available man on it. Thomas wanted to argue, but he knew Crowder was right. The night stretched on. Catherine sat in Laura's bedroom, holding one of her daughter's sweaters, staring at the walls covered in posters of Madonna and Cyndi Lauper. Thomas stood on the porch, staring into the darkness, waiting for headlights that never came. At 5:47 a.m., the sun began to rise over Maple Hollow. By 6:15, Sheriff Crowder had assembled a search party of 23 volunteers, deputies, neighbors, members of the volunteer fire department, and half the congregation from Maple Hollow Baptist Church. They gathered in the high school parking lot, dividing into groups, each assigned a section of the route Laura would have taken. The morning air was cool and damp. The sky was pale blue, cloudless. Thomas walked at the front of one group, his eyes scanning every ditch, every tree line, every shadow. Catherine stayed home, waiting by the phone in case Laura called. The search moved slowly, methodically. They combed the road from the school to the Hensley farm. They checked the fields on either side. They waded through the creek bed. They knocked on doors, asked questions, showed a school photo of Laura, smiling, bright-eyed, full of life. Nobody had seen her. By 8:30 a.m., one of the deputies radioed Sheriff Crowder. Sheriff, you need to come to the water tower. We found something. Crowder's stomach tightened. He walked quickly down the road, Thomas following close behind. The old water tower stood about a mile from the school, rusted and forgotten, surrounded by tall grass and wildflowers. A chain-link fence sagged around its base, half collapsed from years of neglect. Deputy Harold Marsh stood near the fence line, pointing. There, he said quietly, draped over a wooden fence post, as carefully as if someone had placed it there, was a denim jacket. Thomas recognized it immediately. That's hers, he whispered. That's Laura's jacket. Crowder approached slowly, pulling on a pair of gloves. He lifted the jacket gently, turning it over in his hands. No tears, no stains, no signs of struggle. He checked the pockets empty. He looked around the area. The grass showed no sign of disturbance. No footprints in the dirt, no tire tracks on the road. Just the jacket, hanging there like a question mark. Why would she take it off? Marsh asked. Crowder didn't answer. He was staring at the ground near the fence posts. The grass was wet. Not from dew. The rest of the field was dry. This was different, localized, as if something had been spilled, or as if rain had fallen in just this one spot. But it hadn't rained the night before. Crowder knelt down, running his gloved fingers through the damp grass. He brought them to his nose. Nothing. No smell. Just water. He stood slowly, his face unreadable. Bagged the jacket, he told Marsh. Mark the location. I want photographs of everything. The fence post, the grass, the road, all of it. Thomas stepped forward. What does this mean? Where is she? Crowder looked at him, and for the first time, Thomas saw something in the sheriff's eyes that frightened him more than anything. Uncertainty. I don't know, Thomas, Crowder said quietly. But we're going to find out. The search continued for 3 more days. Volunteers walked every inch of Maple Hollow through tobacco fields, along riverbanks, into barns and abandoned sheds. Search dogs were brought in from Lexington. They picked up Laura's scent near the water tower, then lost it completely 30 yards down the road, as if she had simply vanished into the air. No body was found. No witnesses came forward. No ransom calls were made. On June 6th, Sheriff Crowder held a press conference on the courthouse steps. Reporters from Lexington and Louisville crowded around him, cameras flashing, microphones extended. We are treating Laura May Hensley's disappearance as suspicious, Crowder said, his voice steady but strained. We are asking anyone with information to come forward. Any detail, no matter how small, could be critical. Behind him, Thomas and Catherine stood together, holding hands, their faces hollow with grief and sleeplessness. A reporter shouted a question. "Sheriff, do you believe Laura is still alive?" Crowder paused. The question hung in the air. "We are operating under the assumption that she is," he said carefully, "and we will not stop looking until we bring her home." But even as he spoke, he knew the statistics. He knew what usually happened when a teenage girl disappeared without a trace. He just couldn't say it out loud. That night, Maple Hollow felt different. Doors that had never been locked were bolted shut. Parents drove their children everywhere, even in daylight. The bonfire tradition was quietly discontinued. Nobody wanted to gather in the dark anymore. And on County Road 61, the porch light at the Hensley farmhouse stayed on. Every night, all night, waiting. Summer turned to autumn in Maple Hollow, and with it came the slow, suffocating realization that Laura May Hensley was not coming home. The search had continued through June, but by July, the volunteer numbers began to dwindle. People had crops to tend, jobs to return to, lives that demanded their attention. The initial urgency faded into something quieter, something heavier, a collective grief that settled over the town like fog. Sheriff Crowder kept the case open. He worked it every day, often late into the night, sitting at his desk in the cramped sheriff's office, reviewing witness statements, photographs, evidence logs. He had 3 deputies and a county budget that barely covered patrol car maintenance. He was doing everything he could, but it wasn't enough. The evidence they had gathered was frustratingly sparse. The denim jacket, forensically analyzed at the state lab in Frankfurt, yielded no useful information, no foreign fibers, no fingerprints, no trace evidence that might point to a suspect. The damp grass near the water tower remained unexplained. The dogs had lost Laura's scent 30 yards from where the jacket was found, suggesting she had either gotten into a vehicle or been carried. But there were no tire tracks, no witnesses, no physical signs of a struggle. Crowder interviewed everyone who had been at the bonfire that night. Most remembered seeing Laura, but nobody recalled anything unusual. She had been quiet. She had left alone. That was all they could say. Then, in late June, 2 witnesses came forward with conflicting information. Nancy Dalton, a junior at Maple Hollow High, told deputies she had seen Laura talking to someone near the school gates around 9:40 p.m., just before Laura started walking home. There was a red pickup parked by the fence, Nancy said, sitting in the sheriff's office with her mother beside her. "I saw Laura standing next to it, talking to someone through the window." Crowder leaned forward. "Did you see who was driving?" Nancy shook her head. "It was dark. I just saw the truck. I figured it was someone giving her a ride." "Did you see her get in?" "No. I went back to the bonfire. I didn't think anything of it." Crowder made a note. "Can you describe the truck?" "Red. Maybe a Ford, or a Chevy. Older, I think. It had one of those toolboxes in the back." Crowder showed her a series of photographs. Trucks owned by local residents. Nancy couldn't identify any of them with certainty. 2 days later, Ricky Todd, a senior who had been at the bonfire, came forward with a similar story. He claimed he had also seen Laura near the school gates, standing beside a vehicle. But Ricky's description didn't match Nancy. "It wasn't a red truck," Ricky said, frowning. "It was a dark car. Blue, maybe, or black. I only saw it for a second." Crowder felt a knot tighten in his chest. "Are you sure?" "Yeah. I remember because I thought it was weird. Laura didn't have her license yet. I wondered who was picking her up." "Did you see her get in the car?" "No. I went back to help clean up the bonfire." Crowder pressed him for details. Make, model, license plate. Ricky couldn't remember. He had only seen the vehicle for a moment, from a distance, in the dark. The inconsistencies were troubling. Either one of the witnesses was mistaken, or there had been 2 different vehicles near the school gates that night, or neither witness was reliable. Crowder added both statements to the file, but without corroboration, they were essentially useless. The red truck was never identified. The dark car was never found. By August, the case had reached a standstill. Thomas Hensley became a ghost in his own home. He barely spoke. He ate only when Catherine insisted. He spent hours walking the route Laura would have taken, retracing her steps, searching for something, anything that might have been missed. He stopped working the farm. The tobacco went unharvested. The barn fell into disrepair. Neighbors offered to help, but Thomas refused. He couldn't think about crops or cattle or fixing fences. He could only think about Laura. Catherine tried to hold them together. She kept the house clean. She cooked meals that went uneaten. She answered the phone when reporters called. Always polite, always hopeful, always asking the same thing. Have you seen our daughter? But at night, when the house was quiet, Catherine would sit in Laura's bedroom, holding her daughter's things, a hairbrush, a book of poetry, a stuffed rabbit she'd had since childhood. She would cry softly, so Thomas wouldn't hear. Samantha Pike visited often in those early months. She brought flowers. She helped Catherine with the housework. She sat on the porch and talked about Laura, keeping her memory alive. But it hurt too much. By September, Samantha's visits became less frequent. She felt guilty every time she left, but being in that house, surrounded by Laura's absence, was unbearable. Life moved on. The world didn't stop for grief. In October, the school held a memorial service for Laura. The entire town attended. Pastor Elwood, from Maple Hollow Baptist Church, stood at the pulpit and spoke about faith, about hope, about trusting in God's plan, even when we couldn't understand it. Thomas sat in the front row, staring at the floor. Catherine held his hand, her eyes fixed on a photograph of Laura, displayed near the altar. Her school portrait, taken just 3 months before she disappeared, smiling, alive. At the end of the service, the congregation sang Amazing Grace. The voices rose together, filling the church, echoing off the wooden beam. Catherine couldn't sing. She just wept. By the end of 1984, Laura's case had been moved to the cold case section of the sheriff's filing cabinet. It wasn't officially closed. Crowder refused to do that. But there were no new leads, no new evidence, no new hope. The newspapers stopped calling. The volunteers stopped searching. The town stopped talking about it. But the Hensleys never stopped waiting. In 1985, a state investigator named Colin Reeves was assigned to review cold cases in rural Kentucky County. He arrived in Maple Hollow in March, carrying a briefcase full of files and a reputation for being thorough. Crowder met him at the sheriff's office, relieved to have someone with fresh eyes on the case. Reeves spent 3 days in Maple Hollow. He re-interviewed witnesses. He examined the physical evidence. He walked the route Laura had taken. He reviewed the photographs, the logs, the statements. On the 3rd day, Reeves sat down with Crowder and delivered his assessment. There are gaps, Reeves said bluntly. Big ones. Crowder's jaw tightened. What kind of gaps? Reeves opened his briefcase and pulled out a handwritten list. First, the jacket. You found it draped over a fence post, but there's no explanation for how it got there. No footprints. No disturbance in the grass, except for that localized wet spot, which was never properly explained. Crowder nodded. We sent samples to the lab. They said it was just water. Right, but water from where? It didn't rain that night. Crowder didn't have an answer. Reeves continued. Second, the witness statements. You have 2 people who claim they saw Laura near the school gates, but their descriptions of the vehicle don't match. That suggests either one of them is mistaken, or there were 2 vehicles, but you never followed up. I did follow up, Crowder said defensively. I interviewed every truck owner in Maple Hollow. Nobody matched the description. Did you check surrounding county? Crowder hesitated. No. Reeves made a note. Third, Laura's personal belonging. According to the file, her best friend mentioned that Laura had been carrying a small notebook in the weeks before she disappeared. That notebook was never recovered. We searched her room. It wasn't there. So where is it? Crowder spread his hands. I don't know. Reeves leaned back in his chair. And then there's the cassette tape. Crowder frowned. What cassette tape? Reeves pulled a photograph from the file. A picture of Laura's bedroom, taken during the initial search. On the desk, partially visible beneath a stack of school books, was a cassette tape. This, Reeves said, pointing. The label says, June practice. Do you have it? Crowder stared at the photograph. I've never seen that before. Reeves flipped through the evidence log. It's not listed. Which means either it was never collected, or it was collected and not properly logged. Crowder felt a cold knot form in his stomach. That's impossible. We documented everything, did you? The question hung in the air. Reeves closed the file. Look, Sheriff, I'm not here to criticize. You did what you could with the resources you had. But there are procedural errors in this investigation. Evidence that should have been collected wasn't. Witnesses who should have been re-interviewed weren't. And now, 7 months later, we're trying to piece together a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Crowder's face flushed. So what are you saying? I'm saying this case is compromised. Without new evidence, without a witness coming forward, without a body, we're not going to solve this. Crowder stood abruptly. I'm not giving up on her. Reeves looked at him, his expression softening. I'm not asking you to. I'm just being realistic. The meeting ended there. Reeves left Maple Hollow the next day. His report was filed with the state, and the case remained open, but inactive. Crowder returned to his desk, staring at the photograph of Laura's bedroom. The cassette tape, the notebook, the gaps. He had failed her. The years passed slowly. 1986, 1987, 1988. Thomas Hensley aged a decade in those years. His hair turned grey. His face became lined and weathered. He rarely left the farm. He became known as the man who lost his daughter, and people treated him with a quiet, respectful distance, the way you might approach someone standing too close to the edge of a cliff. Catherine tried to keep moving forward. She volunteered at the church. She helped organize community events. She smiled when people asked how she was doing, but the light had gone out of her eyes. In 1990, on what would have been Laura's 22nd birthday, Catherine placed an advertisement in the Lexington Herald-Leader. Laura May Hensley, missing since June 2, 1984. If you have any information, please call the Maple Hollow Sheriff's Office. We still believe, we still hope, we still love you. Beneath the text was Laura's school portrait, smiling, 16 forever. The phone didn't ring. By 1995, Sheriff Emmett Crowder had retired. His replacement, a younger man named Dale Pruitt, inherited the case but had no new leads to pursue. He kept the file in his office, occasionally reviewing it, but with no new evidence, there was nothing to investigate. The town moved on. New families moved in. Children who hadn't been born in 1984 grew up hearing whispered stories about the girl who vanished. Laura became a local legend, a cautionary tale told to teenagers who stayed out too late. But to Thomas and Catherine Hensley, she was still their daughter. In 1998, Thomas had a heart attack while working in the barn. Catherine found him collapsed near the tractor, his face pale, his breathing shallow. He survived, but the doctors said his heart was weak. The stress, the grief, it had taken its toll. Thomas spent his recovery sitting on the porch, staring down County Road 61, waiting for a car that would never arrive. Catherine sat beside him, holding his hand. Neither of them spoke much anymore. There wasn't anything left to say. In 2001, Catherine was diagnosed with cancer, ovarian, stage 4. She fought it for a year. Chemotherapy, radiation, prayers, but in the spring of 2003, she passed away in her sleep, surrounded by family. Thomas held her hand until the end. At her funeral, Pastor Elwood spoke about reunion, about how Catherine was finally at peace, and how she would see Laura again in heaven. Thomas didn't believe it, but he didn't argue. He returned to the farmhouse alone. The porch light was still on. In the summer of 2003, Thomas sold the farm. He couldn't stay there anymore. Every room, every corner, every shadow reminded him of Laura, of Catherine, of a life that had been stolen from him. He moved into a small apartment in town, taking only a few belongings, photographs, Catherine's wedding ring, and a box of Laura's things that he couldn't bring himself to throw away. The new owners of the farmhouse, a young couple from Lexington, named the Bradfords, bought it for a reasonable price. They had plans to renovate, to restore the old house, to turn it into something new. They started work in August, and that's when they found it. August 14th, 2003. The heat was oppressive that summer, the kind that made the air shimmer above the asphalt, and turned the tobacco fields into waves of green and gold. Inside the old Hensley farmhouse, the heat was even worse, trapped between walls that hadn't been opened in decades, thick with dust and the smell of old wood. Rebecca Bradford stood in what had once been Laura's bedroom, wiping sweat from her forehead. She was 32, a schoolteacher from Lexington with a love for old houses and a dream of restoring them. Her husband, Aaron, worked in construction. Together, they had saved for years to buy a place like this, something with history, with character, with potential. The farmhouse had all three, but it also had problems. The roof leaked in 2 places. The plumbing was ancient. The electrical wiring was a fire hazard. And the walls needed to be stripped down to the studs, in several rooms, rebuilt from the inside out. That's what Aaron was doing now, in Laura's old bedroom. He had already removed the floral wallpaper, revealing layers beneath it, older patterns from the 70s, the 60s, maybe earlier. Now he was prying off sections of drywall, preparing to replace them entirely. Rebecca watched from the doorway, holding a trash bag. "Careful with that," she said, as Aaron wedged a crowbar behind a loose panel. "The whole wall might come down." Aaron grinned. "That's the idea." He pulled hard. The drywall cracked, then gave way, pulling free in a cloud of dust. Aaron coughed, waving his hand in front of his face. Rebecca stepped forward, squinting into the gap he'd created. "Wait," she said suddenly. "What's that?" Aaron leaned closer, shining a flashlight into the space between the wall studs. Wedged behind the dry wall, tucked into the narrow gap, was a shoebox. It was old, the cardboard faded and brittle, the edges worn soft with age. It sat perfectly still, as if it had been waiting there for years, hidden in the dark. Aaron reached in carefully and pulled it out. Dust cascaded off the lid. Rebecca's heart was beating faster now. "Open it." Aaron set the box on the floor and lifted the lid. Inside were three things: a Polaroid photograph, a silver earring, and a folded piece of notebook paper, yellowed with time. Rebecca knelt beside him, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up the photograph. It was a Polaroid, the colors slightly faded, but still clear. It showed a teenage girl standing in front of a rusted water tower, smiling at the camera. She wore a denim jacket and jeans, her brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. Behind her, barely visible in the shadows, was a figure, tall, indistinct, standing just out of focus. Rebecca turned the photo over. On the back, written in blue ink, was a date and a time. June 2nd, 1984, 9:52 p.m. Her breath caught. "Aaron," she whispered. "I think this is her." Single quotes. Aaron frowned. "Her who?" "The girl who disappeared. Laura. The one the realtor told us about." Aaron's face went pale. He looked at the photograph again, then at the box. "We need to call someone." Rebecca nodded, but she was already reaching for the piece of notebook paper. She unfolded it carefully, afraid it might crumble in her hands. It was a handwritten note. The ink was faded, but still legible. The handwriting was small, careful, almost childlike. It read, "If anyone finds this, please give it to my mum and dad. Tell them I'm sorry. Tell them I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I thought I could trust him. I thought he was helping. I was wrong. I should have listened. I should have stayed. I'm so sorry. I love you both. LMH." Rebecca read it twice, her hands shaking. "Oh my God," she whispered. Aaron was already on his feet, pulling out his cell phone. "I'm calling the sheriff." Rebecca stared at the note, her mind racing. Laura had written this. She had hidden it in the wall, which meant she had been here in this house after she disappeared. Or had she? Rebecca picked up the silver earring. It was small, simple, the kind a teenager might wear. She held it up to the light, turning it slowly, and then she noticed something. There was a tiny engraving on the back. Initials LMH, Laura May Hensley. 20 minutes later, Sheriff Dale Pruitt arrived at the farmhouse. He was a stocky man in his mid-40s, with a thick mustache and an unensensed demeanor. He had been sheriff of Maple Hollow for 8 years, inheriting the position from Emmett Crowder. He knew about Laura's case. Everyone in town did, but he had never worked it himself. It had gone cold long before he took office. Now, standing in Laura's old bedroom, staring at the shoebox and its contents, he felt a chill run down his spine. "You found this inside the wall?" he asked. Rebecca nodded. "We were tearing out the drywall. It was tucked behind the panel, hidden." Pruitt knelt down, pulling on a pair of latex gloves. He examined the Polaroid first, holding it carefully by the edges. The image was clear enough. Laura, the water tower, the figure in the background. He flipped it over and read the time stamp. June 2nd, 1984, 9:52 p.m. His stomach tightened. Laura had disappeared around 9:45 p.m. that night. This photo was taken just 7 minutes later, which meant someone had been with her. Someone had taken this picture. Pruitt picked up the note next, reading it slowly. "I thought I could trust him. I thought he was helping me. I was wrong." His jaw clenched. This wasn't a runaway. This wasn't an accident. This was something else. He turned to Rebecca and Aaron. "I need you both to stay here. I'm going to call in a crime scene team from Frankfurt. Nobody touches anything else in this room. Understood?" They nodded. Pruitt stepped outside, pulling out his phone. His hands were shaking slightly as he dialed. By evening, the farmhouse was swarming with investigators. A forensics team from the state police arrived with cameras, evidence bags, and equipment. They photographed the bedroom from every angle. They dusted for fingerprints. They examined the wall cavity where the shoebox had been hidden, looking for any other evidence that might have been missed. They found nothing else, but what they had was enough. The Polaroid, the note, the earring. All of it pointed to one undeniable conclusion. Laura had been here, in this house, at some point after she disappeared, and someone had helped her hide this box, or she had hidden it herself. But why? Pruitt stood outside, watching the sun set over the tobacco field. His mind was racing, trying to piece together a timeline that made sense. Laura left the bonfire at 9:43 p.m. The Polaroid was time-stamped 9:52 p.m. taken near the water tower. Her jacket was found draped over a fence post near that same water tower the next morning. So between 9:43 and 9:52, Laura had walked from the school to the water tower, a distance of about a mile. Someone had been with her. Someone had taken her picture. And then what? Had she come home? Had she hidden the box herself? Or had someone else brought it here, planting it as evidence, as a message, as a warning? Pruitt didn't know, but he intended to find out. That night, he drove into town and knocked on the door of a small apartment above the hardware store. Thomas Hensley answered. He looked older than his years, 70 now, his face lined and weathered, his eyes tired. He had lost weight since Catherine died. He moved slowly, as if every step required effort. Sheriff Thomas said quietly, "What can I do for you?" Pruitt hesitated. He had rehearsed this moment in his head a dozen times, but now, standing in front of the man who had lost everything, the words felt impossible. "Mr. Hensley," Pruitt said carefully, "we found something, at your old farmhouse, something that belonged to Laura." Thomas's face went very still. "What did you find?" Pruitt pulled out a photograph, a copy of the Polaroid. He handed it to Thomas. Thomas took it with shaking hands. He stared at the image for a long time, his eyes tracing every detail. Laura's smile, the water tower, the shadow in the background. His lips moved, but no sound came out. There was also a note, Pruitt said gently. She wrote it. "We think she hid it in the wall sometime after she disappeared." Thomas looked up. His eyes were wet. What did it say? Pruitt recited it from memory, word for word. When he finished, Thomas sank into a chair, the photograph still clutched in his hands. "She came home," he whispered. "She came home, and we didn't know." Pruitt knelt beside him. "We don't know that for certain. The note could have been written earlier and hidden later. We're still investigating," but Thomas wasn't listening. He was staring at the photograph, his hands trembling. "Who is that?" he asked, pointing to the shadow in the background. "Who was with her?" Pruitt looked at the image. The figure was too indistinct to identify. Just a tall silhouette, standing in the dark. "We're working on it," Pruitt said. "We're going to enhance the photo, see if we can get a clearer image. And we're going to re-interview everyone who was involved in the original investigation." Thomas nodded slowly, but his face was hollow. "She's gone, isn't she?" Pruitt didn't answer. Thomas closed his eyes. "She's been gone this whole time, and I didn't know." Pruitt placed a hand on the old man's shoulder. "We're going to find out what happened, I promise you." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure it was a promise he could keep. The discovery made headlines. New evidence found in 1984 cold case, Laura May, Hensley's note, discovered after 19 years. The story spread quickly. Local news stations sent reporters. The Lexington Herald Leader ran a front-page article. By the end of the week, national outlets had picked it up. The photograph was released to the public, along with an appeal for information. Anyone who recognized the figure in the background was asked to come forward. The phone lines at the sheriff's office were flooded with calls. Most were dead ends. People claiming to recognize the silhouette, offering theories, sharing stories that led nowhere. But a few calls were different. A few calls made Pruitt sit up and pay attention. One came from a woman named Diane Mercer, who had lived in Maple Hollow in 1984, but had since moved to Ohio. "I saw the photograph," she said, her voice tight, "and I think I know who that is." Pruitt leaned forward. "Who?" His name was Joel Kramer. He worked at the garage in town. He was older, maybe 25, 26. He used to hang around the school sometimes, talking to the girls. "It always seemed off to me, but nobody said anything. People liked him." Pruitt made a note. "Do you know where he is now?" "No. He left town not long after Laura disappeared. I always thought it was strange, but I didn't think much of it at the time." Pruitt thanked her and hung up. He immediately pulled up old records, searching for the name. Joel Kramer. Born 1958. Lived in Maple Hollow from 1980 to 1984. Worked as a mechanic at Henderson's garage. No criminal record. No known address after 1984. He had vanished, just like Laura. Pruitt felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. He had a suspect. Over the next 2 weeks, Pruitt worked tirelessly. He tracked down every piece of information he could find about Joel Kramer: employment records, DMV records, old phone bills. He contacted police departments in neighboring counties, asking if anyone had seen or heard from Kramer in the years since he left Maple Hollow. Nobody had, but Pruitt did find one thing. In 1985, a red pickup truck, matching the description given by Nancy Dalton, had been registered to Joel Kramer. The registration had lapsed in 1984. The truck had never been recovered. Pruitt stared at the registration document for a long time. It fit. All of it fit. Joel Kramer had been at the school that night. He had offered Laura a ride. Maybe she had accepted. Maybe she had trusted him. Maybe she had gotten into his truck, thinking he was helping her get home. And then something had gone wrong. Pruitt returned to the farmhouse one more time, standing in Laura's old bedroom. The forensics team had finished their work. The room was empty now, stripped bare, the walls exposed. He looked at the spot where the shoebox had been hidden, a small, dark gap in the wall. Laura had been here. She had written that note. She had hidden it, hoping someone would find it. And 19 years later, someone finally had. Pruitt closed his eyes, imagining Laura in this room, alone, afraid, writing those words. I thought I could trust him. Single quotes, his hands clenched into fists. Wherever Joel Kramer was, Pruitt was going to find him, and he was going to bring him to justice. September 2003. The search for Joel Kramer consumed Sheriff Dale Pruitt's every waking hour. He worked late into the night, following leads that stretched across state lines, chasing a ghost that had been gone for nearly 2 decades. Kramer's trail was cold, but not entirely dead. Pruitt discovered that after leaving Maple Hollow in the summer of 1984, Kramer had worked briefly at a garage in Bowling Green, then another in Nashville. After that, the records went dark. No tax returns, no driver's license renewals, no credit card activity. It was as if Joel Kramer had simply ceased to exist, but Pruitt kept digging. He contacted the FBI, requesting assistance in locating a potential suspect in a cold case homicide. They added Kramer's name to their database, flagged for any activity: arrests, traffic stops, hospital visits, anything that might generate a paper trail. And then Pruitt waited. Days turned into weeks. The media attention began to fade. The calls to the sheriff's office slowed to a trickle. The town of Maple Hollow settled back into its quiet rhythm, though the discovery of Laura's note had reopened old wounds that had never truly healed. Thomas Hensley spent his days sitting in his apartment, staring at the copy of the Polaroid that Pruitt had given him. He traced his daughter's face with his finger, memorizing every detail, as if by looking hard enough he could bring her back. He couldn't. On October 3, 2003, Pruitt received a phone call that changed everything. It came from a detective in Chattanooga, Tennessee, a man named Ray Donovan, who had been working cold cases in the area for years. Sheriff Pruitt. Donovan's voice was gruff, businesslike. I got your bolo on Joel Kramer. I think I might have something. Pruitt sat up. What do you have? A few years back, 1997, I think we had a vagrant picked up for trespassing near the railroad yard. No ID, gave a fake name, but we ran his prints. They came back to a Joel Kramer, wanted for questioning, in Kentucky. By the time we realized who he was, he'd already been released. He disappeared before we could follow up. Pruitt's pulse quickened. Do you have any idea where he went? No, but I pulled the arrest report. The officer who brought him in wrote that Kramer was living out of his truck at the time, an old red Ford, early 80s model. Ring any bells? Pruitt closed his eyes. The red truck, Nancy Dalton, had seen it at the school gates. The night Laura disappeared. Yeah, Pruitt said quietly. It rings a bell. There's something else, Donovan continued. When they searched the truck, they found a backpack. Inside was a notebook, a small spiral-bound thing, filled with handwriting. The officer thought it might be evidence of something, so he logged it. It's been sitting in our evidence locker ever since. Pruitt felt his heart hammering in his chest. What kind of handwriting? I don't know. I haven't seen it yet. But I can pull it and send you photos if... Do it, Pruitt said. Now, 2 days later, Pruitt received an email with scanned images of the notebook pages. He opened the files slowly, almost afraid of what he might find. The handwriting was small, neat, feminine. It was Laura's. Pruitt sat back in his chair, his hands trembling. The notebook was dated. The first entry was from May 15, 1984, just a few weeks before Laura disappeared. The entries were sporadic, written in the voice of a teenage girl navigating the complexities of small-town life. Most of it was mundane. School, friends, complaints about homework, dreams of leaving Maple Hollow someday, of seeing the world beyond the tobacco field. But then, in early June, the tone shifted. June 1st, 1984. I met someone today. His name is Joel. He works at the garage in town. He was really nice. Said he could help me fix the tape deck in my cassette player. I've been wanting to record my choir practice, but it's been broken for weeks. He said he'd do it for free. He seems nice. Older, but nice. Pruitt's jaw tightened. June 2nd, 1984. Morning. Joel said he'd meet me after the bonfire tonight. He has the tape deck fixed and wants to give it back. He said he'd pick me up near the school and drive me home. I didn't tell Mum and Dad because I know they'd worry. But it's just a ride. He's been really helpful. I trust him. Pruitt felt sick. June 2nd, 1984. Evening. Something's wrong. I'm writing this fast because I don't know what to do. Joel picked me up like he said he would, but instead of driving me home, he took me to the water tower. He said he wanted to take a picture, something to remember me by. I didn't understand why, but I went along with it. Then he started saying things, weird things, about how I was special, how he'd been watching me, how we could leave Maple Hollow together. I told him no. I told him I just wanted to go home. He got angry. He grabbed my arm. I pulled away and ran. I made it to the house, but I don't think he's gone. I can hear his truck outside. I'm scared. I'm hiding this notebook in the wall, so if something happens, someone will find it. Mum, Dad, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I should have told you. I should have been smarter. I love you. That was the last entry. Pruitt read it 3 times, his vision blurring. Laura had made it home. She had written the note, hidden the notebook in the wall, and then what? Had Kramer followed her inside? Had he taken her? Pruitt's hands clenched into fists. He immediately contacted Detective Donovan in Chattanooga. I need you to find Joel Kramer. I don't care what it takes. He's a suspect in a homicide. Donovan's voice was grim. I'll put out an APB. If he's still alive, we'll find him. But weeks passed with no new leads. Kramer had vanished again, slipping through the cracks of a system that wasn't designed to track people who didn't want to be found. Pruitt refused to give up. He continued working the case, re-interviewing witnesses, searching for any detail that might have been missed. And then, in late November, he received another call. This time, it was from a small-town sheriff in rural Georgia, a man named Curtis Boyle. Sheriff Pruitt. Boyle's voice was slow, measured. I think I have your guy. Pruitt's heart stopped. Joel Kramer. Yeah. He died 3 weeks ago. Liver failure. He was living under a fake name in a trailer park outside of Athens. We didn't know who he was until after he died. One of the nurses at the hospital recognized his face from a wanted poster we'd circulated years ago. We ran his prints. It's him. Pruitt felt the world tilt. Dead. Joel Kramer was dead. Did he say anything? Pruitt asked, his voice hoarse. Before he died, did he talk to anyone? Boyle hesitated. Not much, but the nurse said he kept asking for a priest, said he needed to confess something. By the time the priest arrived, Kramer was barely conscious. The priest stayed with him for about an hour. Kramer died that night. Pruitt closed his eyes. I need to talk to that priest. I figured you'd say that. His name is Father Michael Donovan. He works at St. Anthony's in Athens. I'll send you his contact information. 2 days later, Pruitt was sitting in a small, modest church office in Athens, Georgia, across from a man in his 60s, with kind eyes and a weary expression. Father Donovan sat with his hands folded, listening as Pruitt explained the case, Laura's disappearance, the note, the notebook, the years of searching. When Pruitt finished, the priest was silent for a long time. I cannot break the seal of confession, Father Donovan said quietly. You understand that? Pruitt nodded. I understand. But if there's anything at all that you can tell me, I need to know. Laura's father deserves to know. Father Donovan looked down at his hands. He was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. Joel Kramer came to me in his final hours, seeking absolution. The priest said slowly, he was a broken man, consumed by guilt and fear. He told me many things, and I cannot repeat most of them. But I can tell you this. He expressed deep remorse for the harm he had caused. He spoke of a young girl. He said he had made a terrible mistake, that he had acted out of obsession and desperation, and that he had carried the weight of it for nearly 20 years. Pruitt's voice was tight. Did he say where she is? Father Donovan met his eyes. He said she never left Maple Hollow. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Pruitt returned to Kentucky the next day. He didn't go to his office. He didn't call anyone. He drove directly to the old Hensley farmhouse, now owned by the Bradfords, but still heavy with the weight of its history. He stood in the backyard, staring at the fields beyond, the barn, the tree line in the distance. She never left Maple Hollow. Pruitt organized a search team. They brought cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, and a crew of volunteers who combed every inch of the property. It took 3 days. On the third day, the dogs alerted near the old barn, in a section of the property that had been overgrown with weeds and forgotten for years. The excavation was slow, careful. 6 feet down, they found her. Laura May Hensley had been buried in a shallow grave behind the barn, wrapped in a tarp, her body preserved by the cool Kentucky soil. She was still wearing the white cotton blouse she had worn the night she disappeared. The medical examiner confirmed the identity through dental record. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head. Time of death, consistent with June 2, 1984. Pruitt stood at the edge of the grave, staring down at the remains of a girl who had been 16 years old when she died. She had made it home that night. She had run from Joel Kramer. She had hidden the notebook in the wall, hoping someone would find it. But Kramer had followed her. He had come to the house, and when Laura refused him, when she tried to escape, he had struck her. And then he had buried her in the backyard, just yards away from where her parents slept. For 19 years, Thomas and Catherine Hensley had lived in that house, not knowing their daughter was so close. The news spread quickly. Body of missing teen, found after 19 years, suspect died before facing justice. The headlines were everywhere. Pruitt held a press conference on the courthouse steps, flanked by state investigators and the district attorney. He explained the findings, the evidence, the confession relayed through Father Donovan. Joel Kramer had killed Laura May Hensley, and he had taken the truth with him to the grave. Thomas Hensley sat in the front row, his face pale, his hands folded in his lap. When the press conference ended, Pruitt approached him. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hensley," Pruitt said quietly. "I wish I could have brought him to justice." Thomas looked up. His eyes were red, but there were no tears left. "You found her," Thomas said. "After all these years, you found her. That's enough." But it wasn't enough. Not really. Laura May Hensley was laid to rest on December 10, 2003, in a small ceremony at Maple Hollow Baptist Church. The church was packed. Friends, neighbors, former classmates, people who had never stopped thinking about the girl who disappeared on a summer night in 1984. Pastor Elwood spoke about grace, about mercy, about the long journey home. Thomas sat in the front row, staring at the casket. Catherine wasn't there. She had died 2 years earlier, never knowing what had happened to their daughter. But Thomas knew now, and that knowledge was both a relief and a burden. After the service, as the mourners filed out into the cold December air, Thomas remained seated. Samantha Pike, now in her 30s with children of her own, sat down beside him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Thomas nodded. "So am I." They sat in silence for a long time, two people who had loved Laura in different ways, bound together by the ache of her absence. Finally, Thomas stood. He walked slowly to the casket, placed his hand on the polished wood, and whispered something too quiet for anyone to hear. Then he turned and walked out of the church. The porch light at the Hensley farmhouse was turned off for the first time in 19. Laura was home. In the months that followed, the case was officially closed. Joel Kramer's name was added to the list of perpetrators who had evaded justice by dying before trial. The red pickup truck was never recovered. The cassette tape labeled June Practice was never found. But Laura's story did not end with her burial. Her case became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers that can hide in plain sight, of the trust that can be exploited, of the silence that can bury the truth for decades. In 2005, the town of Maple Hollow erected a small memorial near the old water tower, a stone plaque engraved with Laura's name and the dates of her birth and death. Beneath it, a single line, in memory of Laura May Hensley, gone, but never forgotten. Every year on June 2nd, someone leaves flowers there. Sometimes it's Thomas, sometimes it's Samantha, sometimes it's people who never knew Laura, but feel compelled to remember her anyway. Because Laura's story is not just about a girl who disappeared. It's about a father who never stopped searching, a mother who never stopped hoping, a town that never stopped remembering, and a truth that, no matter how deeply buried, will always find its way to the surface. Thomas Hensley passed away in 2011 at the age of 78. He was buried beside Catherine and Laura in the Maple Hollow Cemetery, the three of them together at last. The farmhouse on County Road 61 still stands, though it has changed hands several times since. The Bradfords eventually moved away, unable to shake the weight of what had happened there. But the land remembers. The tobacco fields still stretch to the horizon. The old water tower still stands, rusted and forgotten. And on quiet summer nights, when the cicadas sing and the stars blink through the heat, you can almost imagine a girl walking down that dirt road, heading home. Almost. Sheriff Dale Pruitt retired in 2015, after 30 years in law enforcement. He kept a copy of Laura's Polaroid in his office until the day he left a reminder of the case that had defined the final years of his career. When asked about it in interviews, he always said the same thing. Justice isn't always about trials and convictions. Sometimes it's just about bringing someone home. And in the end, that's what he did. He brought Laura home. The story of Laura May Hensley has been featured in documentaries, podcasts, and books about cold cases. Her name is taught in criminal justice courses as an example of perseverance in the face of impossible odds. But in Maple Hollow, she is simply remembered as the girl with the hazel eyes who loved to sing, who dreamed of seeing the world, who trusted the wrong person on a summer night in 1984. Her voice is gone. Her dreams are gone. Her life was stolen before it truly began. But her memory endures. And sometimes that has to be enough. In the end, the silence spoke louder than any confession. The years have a way of smoothing over even the sharpest edges of tragedy. In Maple Hollow, Kentucky, life moves forward as it always has, slowly, steadily, with the rhythm of the season. The tobacco fields still turn gold in autumn. The church bells still ring on Sunday mornings. Children still play in the streets, their laughter carrying on the summer breeze. But beneath the surface, the memory of Laura May Hensley lingers like a shadow that never quite fades. Her story is told in whispers now, passed down from one generation to the next. The older residents remember her as a real person, a girl who sat in their classrooms, who sang in the church choir, who walked the same roads they walk today. The younger ones know her only as a name on a memorial plaque, a cautionary tale about stranger danger and the fragility of trust. But everyone in Maple Hollow knows her. Samantha Pike, now Samantha Porter, still lives in town. She runs a small antique shop on Main Street, filled with relics of the past that people bring in from estates and attics. Sometimes, customers ask her about the old photographs on the wall, pictures of Maple Hollow in the 80s, frozen moments of a simpler time. She never tells them that one of those photographs includes Laura. It's a candid shot from the spring of 1984, taken at the school's annual picnic. Laura is sitting on a blanket, laughing at something off camera, her face lit up with joy. Samantha keeps it on the wall, not as a memorial, but as a reminder that Laura's life was more than just the way it ended. She was a person. She was loved. She mattered. On quiet afternoons, when the shop is empty and the sunlight slants through the front windows, Samantha sometimes finds herself thinking about that last night, the bonfire, the way Laura had seemed distant, the way she had waved goodbye and walked into the darkness alone. Samantha wonders, even now, if there was something she could have done differently, some sign she missed, some warning she should have heeded. But she knows, deep down, that the only person responsible for what happened to Laura was Joel Kramer, and he's gone now, buried in an unmarked grave in Georgia, his name forgotten by everyone, except those who studied his crimes. The red pickup truck was never found, though rumors persist. Some say it was crushed in a junkyard years ago. Others claim it's still out there somewhere, rusting in a barn, a relic of a tragedy no one wants to remember. The cassette tape labeled June Practice remains missing. Laura's voice, the songs she loved to sing, the choir practice she had wanted to record, is lost forever. But her words endure. The notebook she hid in the wall, the note she left behind, the desperate plea for someone to find her, those words have been preserved, archived, studied. They are a testament to her courage, her hope, her belief that even in the darkest moments, the truth would eventually come to light. And it did. The memorial near the old water tower has become a pilgrimage site of sorts. People come from all over the state to leave flowers, to take photographs, to stand in the place where Laura was last seen alive. Some leave notes of their own, messages of sympathy, prayers for her soul, reflections on the fragility of life. Others simply stand in silence, paying their respects to a girl they never knew, but whose story has touched them deeply. The plaque itself is simple, unadorned. Just her name, her dates, and that single line, "Gone but never forgotten." But to those who knew her, it feels inadequate. How do you sum up a life, all its potential, all its dreams, all its love, in a few words carved into stone? You can't, but you try. Thomas Hensley's final years were spent in quiet reflection. After Laura's remains were found and laid to rest, he seemed to find a measure of peace. Not happiness exactly that had been taken from him long ago, but a kind of acceptance. He visited Laura's grave every week, without fail. He would sit on the grass beside her headstone, talking to her as if she could hear him. He told her about the weather, about the town, about the memories that still made him smile. He told her he was sorry for not protecting her, for not knowing she was so close, for all the years he had spent searching in the wrong places. He told her he loved her, and he told her he would see her soon. In 2011, he kept that promise. The funeral was small, attended only by close friends and a few remaining family members. He was buried between Catherine and Laura, the three of them reunited at last. The inscription on his headstone reads, simply, "Thomas Hensley, loving husband and father, at peace." And perhaps, finally, he was. Dale Pruitt thinks about the case often, even in retirement. He lives in a small house, on the outskirts of Maple Hollow, spending his days fishing, reading, and tending to a garden that his wife insists grows better every year. But at night, when the house is quiet and the world feels still, his thoughts sometimes drift back to that summer in 2003, when Laura's story came back to life. He thinks about the shoebox hidden in the wall, the Polaroid with the shadowy figure, the notebook filled with Laura's handwriting, the grave behind the barn. He thinks about the questions that were never fully answered. Why did Joel Kramer target Laura? Was it obsession, opportunity, a twisted sense of entitlement? Why did he bury her so close to her home? Was it arrogance, convenience, or some dark need to keep her near? And what happened to the cassette tape? Did Kramer take it, destroy it, hide it somewhere it will never be found? Pruitt knows he'll never have all the answers, but he made peace with that long ago. What matters is that Laura was found, that her family finally knew the truth, that justice, in whatever imperfect form it took, was served. Sometimes, that has to be enough. The farmhouse on County Road 61 has changed hands 3 more times since the Bradfords moved away. The current owners, a retired couple from Louisville, have done their best to restore it, to bring light and life back into a place that has known so much darkness. They repainted the exterior, replaced the roof, modernized the kitchen, and planted flowers along the front porch. They know the history, of course. Everyone who buys the house knows the history. But they chose to see it not as a place of tragedy, but as a home that deserves a second chance. They say the house feels peaceful now, that whatever darkness once lingered there has finally been laid to rest. But on quiet nights, when the wind whispers through the tobacco fields and the moon hangs low over the horizon, they sometimes hear footsteps on the gravel driveway, soft, steady. Heading home, they never see anything, and in the morning the driveway is always empty. But they've stopped being afraid, because if it's Laura, then she's finally where she belongs. Home, the old water tower still stands, though it has fallen into even greater disrepair over the years. The chain-link fence has collapsed entirely. Weeds have claimed the ground. Rust has eaten through the steel. But the memorial plaque remains, polished and cared for by volunteers who refuse to let Laura's memory fade. And every year, on June 2nd, someone leaves flowers there. Sometimes it's Samantha. Sometimes it's someone who knew Laura. Sometimes it's a stranger who simply wants to honor a life cut short. But the flowers are always there. Always. In the end, Laura May Hensley's story is not just about a girl who disappeared. It's about a community that refused to forget her. It's about a family that never stopped loving her. It's about the long, painful journey from loss to closure, from questions to answers, from darkness to light. It's about the truth that, no matter how deeply buried, will always find its way to the surface, because some voices refuse to be silenced, some stories refuse to end, and some people, even in death, refuse to be forgotten. Laura May Hensley was one of them. She was 16 years old when she walked down a dirt road on a summer night in 1984 and never came home. But her memory lives on, in the flowers left at the water tower, in the songs sung in the church choir, in the whispered stories passed down through generations, in the hearts of those who still remember. She was more than a victim, more than a statistic, more than a cautionary tale. She was a daughter, a friend, a girl with dreams and hopes and a whole life ahead of her. And though that life was stolen, her story endures, because in Maple Hollow, Kentucky, some things are never forgotten, and Laura May Hensley is one of them. Sometimes the truth survives only in the memories of those who still wait.